Our company is considered the oldest company in the Netherlands. We are over 400 years old, and the oldest document we have is from 1572. And from that date on, we have proof that we were here on this spot producing ceramics, and we have all kinds of documents. And we started as a brick producer, so we produced bricks for making houses, and mainly the houses around the Zuiderzee, or what we now call the IJsselmeer, cities like Hoorn, Enkhuizen and Amsterdam. And the houses and the buildings there were produced with bricks, and some of them came from here. And that was until about 1680, when the last bricks came out of the kiln. We have proof of that last kiln. And from that date on, something had to be done. So we started to produce dishes for daily use, a bit roughly produced dishes, and tiles. And those two products were the main products for 200 years, from 1680 until 1880. And we exported those products from a coastal line from Lisbon to St. Petersburg, where you can find those products even today. And that was also the beginning of that time, was also the beginning of the family. It was Frederik Jans, who was 11 generations back, my grandfather, who did the turnover from brick manufacturing to producing dishes and tiles. And the next big step in history of the company was in around 1880, 1890, when a new technique was introduced in the Netherlands. Up until then, every fine ceramic company used local clay and covered it after having fired it one time with a tin glaze, a wide-bodied tin glaze. And you painted on that glaze and you fired the product again, and the decoration melted together with the white glaze underneath. But Joshua Wedgwood introduced in the Netherlands a new technique, not using local clay, but using imported clay, which when fired was purely white. So you didn't need the tin glaze. You could paint on the fired earth, which was white, and put a transparent glaze over it. It was easier, there was less breakage, and all fine ceramic companies transformed from local clay to the imported clay. All but one, my great-great-grandfather, decided not to do that and stick to the traditional technique, but he couldn't produce dinnerware anymore. He had to produce ornamental ware. So that was when we started to produce ornamental ware, which we still do. And the period of time when the company was the largest was in the 70s, when we had around 70, 80 painters, all reproducing designs from the 18th century. And that ended in the 90s, actually in the 80s and the 90s, when people started to spend their money in a different way. Shops disappeared, and there was a crisis in the beginning of the 80s who introduced this, and so we could carry on a little bit, but things went worse and worse and worse. And in the 90s, it was clear that something had to be done. So we had to make a decision. What are we going to do? There was mainly two choices. Or we were going to be a touristic attraction, and then we had to start producing or somewhere else in a low-wage country, or we had to mechanize the production process. The other choice was, and this choice we made, was that what is it exactly what we want to continue? Our company is the oldest in the Netherlands. The company we want to continue, but what are the core assets of the company? And looking through the eyes of employees, shareholders, clients, and other stakeholders, we said the craftsmanship of our people, together with the ceramic know-how which we've been building up by doing restorations, are the key assets, and those two we want to continue. Only the field in which we use it today, namely traditional reproductions and restorations, are too narrow. We have to broaden the fields in which we work, and that's why we decided to find new fields like product design, architecture, and fashion. And the first designer with whom we worked was Hella Jongerius. She was in her beginning also, as were we, and we found each other because we recognized the same mentality. She was working at the time with a porcelain service, developing it. We hadn't produced porcelain, we could only produce earthenware. And so I said, when we met, and she asked me, can you produce this? We said, well, we can't, I don't think so. We have never produced porcelain. It will deform in the kiln. And she said, no, that's no problem. It looks like a sculpture. It's a thing of beauty instead of all perfect plates stacked together. And she was actually the first who made clear something that we felt already, but she made it clear that imperfections were scarce in production. Everything you buy, if it's from IKEA or whatever, is perfect. So imperfections could be seen as a luxury, actually. And so that's when I learned that there were more people with the same mentality. Craftsmanship was not finished yet, it was not dead yet, and there were new possibilities within new contemporary designers. And after her, people like Jurgen Bij and Studio Joop and even fashion designer Alexander van Slobbe, who from a total different point of view was also interested in craftsmanship, in local traditions. And from that interest in history, trying to use traditional ways of manufacturing, embroideries, etc., etc. So he obviously had the same mentality, and together we, for example, we did the pearls of Makkum, which is an interpretation, a reinterpretation of a pearl necklace, where we hand painted small, or for a pearl large, porcelain pearls, actually. So it is not that we commission something to a designer. It's not that a designer comes fout. So it's not that a designer comes to us with a design which is finished and asks us, could you produce this for us? Because then we would be reproducing. And the main reason not to do that is that there's no value for us here in a high-wage country like the Netherlands to do that. If we want to be sure that continuity can be achieved, we have to achieve a certain level of quality, not only a technical or aesthetical quality, but also a cultural quality. Only then there's a reason for producing here in the Netherlands. So what we do from time to time, mostly every year, we commission to a certain designer a project. We try not to define it very specifically. So it can vary. With Hella, we will ask her the roughly painted dishes, which was the main product in the 18th and 19th century. How would you do that today? Look at it, use it as a starting point. And what she then does is not lock her up in a room and come out of it a half a year later with the design. No, she understands that because she embraces, like the other designers we work with, our core values, and the fact that products are going to be produced by hand, and the love and care put into that, she embraces that as one of the starting points of her designing process, and doing so, admitting us in that process and using us to get further and achieving a higher level of quality than she would have done, not asking us to cooperate. So with Studio Joop and Jurgen Bij and Alexander van Slobbe and the others we work with, we don't have to claim a certain position in their creative process. They let us in their creative process. And together, and that's because of that mentality, we work with those designers. And because we work in that way, I'm convinced that the process is done in such an open way that the product that will come out of it will show the process which has led to that product, and therefore giving it the cultural value which we hope we achieve with all our products.
So are there specific criteria to work with a certain designer?
Yes, you could say there's a certain criterion to work with a designer or not work with a designer, but it's mostly intuitively, because we want to hear what is the attitude of the designer towards us. And if that attitude is the same as our attitude towards the designer, there's a sort of mutual, not understanding, but a mutual respect to create together something. Not that we have an aspirations in the creative process, but we do have in the manufacturing process. So we want to learn what the creative process for the designer is step by step, not going straight to the product, but step by step, keeping it as wide open as possible in the first phase, and hoping that the designer wants to embrace certain values of our production and craftsmanship way of working. And when you have that attitude, I think we could work with you.
So it's just love for craftsmanship as well.
Yes, obviously it's a love. It's not only a love for craftsmanship; it's also the sense that craftsmanship is needed to make a product which has a value beyond an aesthetical value. So we hope that we will create together with designer products that will be with people for a very long time. So you want to keep with you, you want to cherish, and therefore producing a sort of sustainable product.
So do you see an increase in interest from people into
From the general public?
Yes.
Yes, I see an interest from the general public in craftsmanship, and I think it's understandable. I mean, the world we live in becomes smaller and smaller, so you could be virtually everywhere within a split second, or in real life within 24 hours. So it's not difficult to understand that people want to know what are the roots where I'm from, and what's the group I belong to. And in the Netherlands, you can see that for the last 5-6 years, there's an enormous interest in local produced vegetables, which we didn't know up until a couple of years ago, or other ingredients and food in general. And also you see it in arts and crafts. I mean, it's obvious, and people like Alexander van Slobbe sees that very sharply, that craftsmanship is so scarce that you could see it as a new luxury. I mean, luxury should be about scarceness of materials or skills or whatever, and luxury industry is not possible. I mean, luxury is scarceness, industry is mass produced. So a mass produced luxury article, it is in the word itself is impossible. So we want to show people that products or pieces who are produced by skilled hands, and the product couldn't be produced without them, have a certain value. And I think in the world around us, the interest in that aspect is growing. It's not the case that we have a traditional collection and a contemporary collection separated by each other. It used to be that way. We had in the 70s and in the 60s, we had the collection traditional products, which was 95% of our turnover. And we had separated from that, we had a collection from Jan van der Vaart, which was a Dutch ceramist, but it had a different logo and everything was different. Now it's what all products share. That's what we want to show, and which is love and care and tradition. And those aspects can be used, and the craftsmanship can be used to reproduce something that was designed 200 or 300 years ago, but you also can use something that was designed today, and that's no different. So by choosing it that way, you want to show that it's the producing, the making of the products, and is the value they share. And of course, you need a certain level of design quality, but the quality of the product is also, for a very important part, a result of the craftsmanship and the time which is spent on making the product.
And do you work differently with designers as with architects, for instance?
Yes, the how we work with architects is totally different compared to how we work with designers. With designers, for instance, we have the lead. So we think in a certain area we want to commission a project to a certain designer because we think it's interesting to develop something. For instance, we asked Dick van Hof to broaden the scope of possibilities to use ceramics, so not only in vases and bowls and etc. But we asked him, what could you do else with ceramics? And he came back a couple of weeks later and he said, I have to add a second material if I want to answer your question. I have to add wood, for instance. So we said, okay, go ahead, do that. And then he came up with desk accessories. So we have 2 desk lamps and a clock and also a vase, but also a pencil box. And that only can occur when you commission it in such a way. We haven't asked him to design a lamp. That was his idea. But we have enlarged the possibilities of ceramics. With architects, on the other hand, we don't commission anything. We are there. They know that we have certain possibilities to make something. We learned that from doing restoration. So in the Netherlands, famous architects like Berlage and Dudok and Brinkman van der Vlucht in the beginning of the 20th century used a lot of ceramics and did a lot of research together with ceramic companies then to make certain effects in the glaze. And being asked to do the restoration of those kinds of buildings, we relearned to how they did that. And from that know-how, or actually said this know-how, we offer to contemporary architects. So they come to us with a certain idea. It could be a very specific idea, like Koen van Velzen. He had a very specific idea about a certain glaze. He wanted it to look like anodized aluminum. And it took us some time, a year, but we succeeded in producing that. But other architects like MVRDV, Jacob van Rijs, he, in a large building in Amsterdam, he wanted to have a certain pattern within the white glazed bricks on the inside of the building. And he wanted to have this pattern which was distinguished. Sometimes you could see it, sometimes you couldn't. And that was what he asked. And we produced our laboratory, and we have a large laboratory with 4 people doing all kinds of developments. So it could be developments for architects, could be for other artists, could be developments which we ourselves commission, could be quality things. So it's continuously we are developing new materials and new glazes. But Jacob van Rijs, as said, we produced 10 different sorts of glaze, all with starting with white, but all with a second or a third effect on it. And he picked one glaze which actually had failed because it was shrunken to sort of drops on the brick. And he said, "This is what I want. Could you continue developing it and making it right?" And which is what we did. So we produced those 10 samples with all types of white, not off-white. It was all the same white, but all had a second or a third effect in it. So it could be a crystal glaze or a shrinking glaze or whatever. And he picked a glaze which had shrunken so much that you had drops on the brick, molten drops of glaze. He said, "This is what I want." So we continued developing that glaze and made the composition in such a way that this shrinkage occurred with all the bricks when fired. So it depends on what an architect asks, but it's always the architect who comes to us asking us to help him develop a certain materialization of a building, a certain skin. All these developments we do in our laboratory, and we have, for the scale of our company, we have a very large laboratory with 4 people working there. We are the only ceramic industry in the Netherlands having its own laboratory. And what we do there is it's continuously developing new materials, mainly new glazes, but also new glaze, new mixtures of glaze, finding out what is the certain physical and chemical aspects. We do these developments because we are interested in the material. Sometimes those developments are started up by a question. For instance, an architect wanting a certain glaze, or a restoration, a building where we have a sample and we have to without knowing how it was produced, we have to reproduce the material. But sometimes from ourselves, we think a certain path could be interesting, and we do a whole project where we want to find out how does this clay work with that glaze, etc. So, and that's what we do. That's, I think, the reason why we are still here in this period of time. I mean, all craft manufacturers in the Netherlands have disappeared, from silver to tin to textile to wood to leather. You name it, it's all disappeared. And we are here because we have embraced the core values, we have an open mind, and we are curious as the designers and the architects are curious. So we understand each other's language.
Could you say that designers and architects help you innovate?
Oh yes, I think designers and architects helps us innovate because they always come up with questions which we couldn't come up with. It's because we are since we know we have a history of ceramics and this is our field of interest. There are certain questions which you don't ask because it's not within the materials logic steps to ask them. And designers don't have this ballast, and architects, so they just come up and they ask a question which we think, whoa, yeah, that's something completely different. We could try. And then we come up with something which is probably not the answer, but it will help them redefine their question. And that process of coming up with samples, asking the architect, what do you think of it, make adjustments, that process of, you could say, question and answer, I think that's one of the key aspects to work towards a project or a product with a certain cultural value. Another example is recently the Museum of Arts and Design was reopened. It's a building in a very prominent spot on Columbus Circle on the corner of Central Park in New York, and the architect there, he wanted, well actually in the beginning he wanted to have a sort of glimmering glaze, sort of glaze with sort of glistering pieces within the glaze. So we sent some samples, but I also thought there are some other effects which he hasn't asked for, but they could be as interesting as his question. So we sent 6 or 7 extra samples, one of them having a glaze which had a sort of iridescence in it. And this was the glaze he was very enthusiastic about and asked us to continue on that path, ending up in a museum of art and design which is clad in a completely, let's say, a glaze which is so unstable when fired that the iridescence comes up and you see it in the building with a certain type of, the certain position of the sun compared to the skin of the building. What we try to do when we approach a designer is that before we do that, we want to sketch the contours of a certain commission. So what we do is first ask ourselves the question, which aspect of the company we find interesting to work from. Mostly it is a certain part of the craftsmanship, could be the painters, for instance. And the painters normally paint traditional reproductions of something which was designed 200 years ago. But for instance, the project with Studio Job, where we asked him not only to redefine traditional archetypical parts from our traditional collection, we also said, try to think of how our painters work and redesign the decorations of those pieces. So we don't want a designer to say to us, well, you should use a big brush and then start to paint. No, we specifically tell the designers, this is what our people can do, use it for your designing as a starting point from your design. And it could not only, sometimes it's a certain part of the craftsmanship, and sometimes it's a piece that was here which could be reinvented or reformulated. For instance, the Maiolica set of which Hella designed started from the roughly painted bowls from the 18th and 19th century, which was produced in this company. So we asked her, this was the main product for 200 years, how would you do this today? And that's where she promoted actually the backside, which had a transparent glaze, to the front side. So she promoted again something that was not so important to something that forms now a central part of the decoration. And a third example is the flower pyramid project, which was a very huge project recently, where it started with a question of the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, who had bought 2 flower pyramids, which are generally seen as the most exclusive pieces ever produced in Delft. And since Delft doesn't have that technique anymore, and we still do, they asked us, could you recomplete those flower pyramids, because segments were missing. And it took us more than a year, actually 1.5 years, even having the same, and still using the same technique to reach the refinement of those pieces. And when achieved at the end, we asked the Rijksmuseum, since we have put so much effort in it, would you allow us to make a reproduction of the whole thing, using this traditional reproduction as a starting point for the 4 designers who we know best to make a contemporary reinterpretation. So it was 4 contemporary answers to a traditional piece, forming a unique collection of 5 exuberant traditional / contemporary Delft pieces.